Hello, everybody. It's me, Mitch. I think this video I'm making today was a long time coming. I'm going to talk to you about some things, some of them deeply personal. Many of these things I've shared on live streams, maybe in some videos, but I've never put all this together for the record, to make sure that my story of my health, my struggles on diets, my serious medical conditions that I had, psychological and depression problems, cancer, brain surgery, and many other things that happened to me in the first 75 years of my life that by all accounts, I shouldn't be here now. Not only shouldn't I be alive, but I shouldn't be healthy. And I attribute finally discovering carnivore, figuring out how to sustain it, living this lifestyle for 2 full years. I can't think of anything else that I can credit with such certainty for the fact that I'm sitting here in front of you today and telling this story. Let's go back quite a long ways. This picture is me probably in my 30s. I wasn't fat. I wasn't skinny. I was somewhere between 200 and 150 or 60 pounds, a level that I bounced up and down for my whole life because, unbeknownst to me, I was a carb addict. I tried to be healthy. I tried to listen to all the advice. I tried all of those things and ate all of the foods they told me were healthy. I ate all of those servings of healthy whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. I exercised. I was doing everything that I was told. I watched my calories. I tried to make sure that my calories out exceeded my calories in. After all, it's what we knew. We didn't know where the food pyramid came from at the time. We didn't know anything about whether the fact that cholesterol was going to kill us. We had no idea. We were doing the best we can with the information we had, and that applies to all of us that are in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and older today. So this picture of me is fairly typical of what I looked like in between the yo-yos, up and down. Didn't take a lot of pictures of myself when I was heavy, but I do have a few of them. Here's another picture of me standing near an airplane, pretty much maybe a little older than that last picture, but with the same particular body shape, carrying a few too many pounds. Here's a picture of me standing on a dock at some point where I was much heavier. Here I am again, maybe a little thinner again. Here I am in Hawaii, maybe in better shape. Here I am again, maybe in not such good shape. And again, you can see by my face that I was carrying a little extra weight there. There's me, and they used to call me Spot because I had this, what I thought was a freckle on my nose. I'd had it most of my life. Only later did it start getting darker and eventually turn into malignant cancer. I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea that the diet that I was eating actually encouraged and maybe even caused this cancer. Who knew? Also, all during my life, my blood pressure kept getting higher and higher. I needed to be on more and more blood pressure medications. I developed eczema on my skin. I eventually developed kidney stones, rheumatoid arthritis, along with the cancer. I had a few injuries. I shattered my wrist. And in a fall, I injured my head, ending up with brain surgery, which I'll talk about pretty soon. How many of those conditions, how much of that can I attribute to unhealthy eating? I would say most of it. Now, if I hadn't have discovered at 75, after a lifetime of trying to be healthy, of eating mostly low carb, avoiding processed foods, except for those times between diets when my addictions would take hold and I would put on 30 to 50 pounds in a month or two. It was crazy. I ate healthy. I never got obese. I was never 300-400 pounds like so many people we see today who are struggling. I never had diabetes because I never ate enough sugar to become a diabetic. I always was what I considered health conscious. And as I got older and these different things started going wrong, I always wondered why. Why is this happening? I can attribute it now almost completely to a diet, to the food and the poisons we're eating, all of those high oxalate vegetables, all of that carbohydrate-rich pastas and breads, sweets and ice cream and everything that I couldn't get enough of because it just made me feel so good. Even with all that, I was able to stay away from the medical community until I noticed that that spot on my nose was starting to turn very dark. I went to the dermatologist. They did a biopsy, and it turned out that that was a malignant melanoma, and they assured me that they had caught it early enough, but it was cancer nonetheless, and it scared me to death. It scared me to death. In order to remove that, they have to cut it off and also cut a margin of more than 1/8 of an inch around it. And they ended up cutting most of the skin off the top of my nose. They sent all that to the lab, of course, to make sure that they got it all. They cut a big piece of skin off of my shoulder right here. I have a big scar. And they grafted that skin on my nose. And I walked around looking like this for quite a while. I went back for a couple follow-up surgeries where they tried to smooth it out and make that graft disappear. They didn't do the greatest job of it. You can still see the indentation, but all of that you see in the middle is my shoulder. You can still see the indentation there. Maybe it looks like I'm an ex-prize fighter or something, but you can see how big the skin graft was, and that's the best they could do cosmetically. And the good news was that it hadn't spread. It hadn't metastasized. For the next 5 years, every 3 months, I went back to the dermatologist to make sure that none of that skin cancer had reappeared. During many of those visits to the dermatologist, I had numerous what they call pre-cancers. They freeze them with liquid nitrogen. And every time I went, every 3 months, there were more of these pre-cancers. So I was still fighting a battle with skin cancer. I was always afraid that eventually it was going to be the thing that killed me. It really wasn't till carnivore, believe it or not, that the pre-cancers stopped. And in 2 years, and I go every 6 months to the dermatologist now just to make sure, and they do checks of my lymph system and everything else to make sure that cancer has not returned, that I am pretty confident I've got a clean bill of health as far as the cancer department goes. I've had no pre-cancers. None of these things have had to be frozen. And I rest easy now knowing that if something kills me, it most likely won't be skin cancer. But in the meantime, I was going through rough times, and being metabolically ill, which I knew I was, eating all of these poisons, it wasn't too hard for me to fall into a depression. It wasn't too hard for me when things went badly as they did, and I've told those stories and I won't tell them now, to get suicidal thoughts, horrible thoughts, dark, dark places, struggling to regain my life, already an old man, and what, start over? I didn't have it in me. It was a very bad time, and that bad time lasted almost 10 years, during which I got the cancer. I fell off a ladder, shattered my wrist. I had to have a steel plate with screws put in, 2 or 3 months of physical therapy, but I do have perfect use of it now. And I don't know if you can see it on this camera, but there is a scar, and it runs from here all the way up to here. And I have something that sets off the metal detectors at the airport built into me now. But that wrist has healed pretty good. And I was starting to do well. I had gotten on keto about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was doing keto, trying to limit the carbs, but I still, on a regular keto diet, even if I was keeping it under 20 total grams of carbs a day, I was losing weight. I started to go back to the gym and work out. I started to feel better, but I was still a flaming addict. So I started, of course, making chaffles. I started making different kinds of breads. I started making pizzas and pizza dough, all low carb, but every time ended up triggering my addictions, sabotaging my efforts, and putting weight back on again. And all that went on like that until 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, this happened. By far, the single most serious medical, I'll call it an adventure, that had ever happened in my life. Probably the closest I came to actually dying in my life. I've told this story on my live stream. I want to tell you a quick version of this story now, but suffice it to say, I had to have brain surgery. That's the scar. They cut out whatever's under that scar. They had to open my skull and remove an almost 1 inch thick subdural hematoma, which is a big blood clot, that was pressing on my brain and compressing my brain, and had it not been taken care of, the odds favored it killing me. It all started, here's another picture of it. I happen to be wearing the same shirt today. It all started in August 3 years ago with me working out at the Health First gym here. I had just gotten back to working out. I used to work out on and off a lot. When we go back to working out, we tend to overestimate our ability and our stamina and overdo it because, like everything else, we want quick results. We want to get back to where we were in a hurry. And I was no different. I overdid it. I said, okay, that's enough for you, Mitch. You're starting to feel a little lightheaded. I hydrated. I went down to the locker room where they have a steam room and a sauna and all that good stuff. And I said, well, let me just unwind and relax down here. Went into the steam room for about 20 minutes. Went into the sauna. Their sauna is very hot. I think 160, 170 degrees. Unfortunately, when I went into the sauna, I struck up a conversation with another guy in there. We got talking about dieting. I started talking about keto. This was 3 years ago. And ended up sitting in that hot sauna for 45 minutes. When I got up, I was really dizzy. I had a little more water, went back to my locker. I needed to lay down, so I lay down on the wooden bench in front of my locker, and I've overdone it before in my lifetime, and I knew that if you just rested a little while, everything would be all right. So I laid down, figuring, lay there for 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll be fine. Well, I wasn't fine. I don't remember trying to get up. The next thing that I knew, I was in the emergency room of the hospital next door. My son was sitting there. It's a good thing my locker was unlocked and they could see my wallet and my ID in the locker, and they know who my emergency contact was and everything else and who I was. They called an ambulance. The ambulance took me next door to the hospital. I'm in the emergency room. I wake up. About an hour and a half had passed. I had been unconscious. I woke up confused. I said, what happened? Where am I? My son told me what had happened. Evidently, I had passed out when I stood up. And in the fall on the way down, I hit my head right back here on the corner of the bench. Jarred my head so much that, as it turned out, after looking at the CT scan, on this side of my head right here, opposite, right across, because of the whiplash of my brain, I had a bleed, something they called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. They told me there was a chance I might have to have surgery to drain the blood, either a burr hole or something like that, and that they might have to send me down to the neurology wing of their sister hospital. But they wanted to keep me and observe it, so they kept me overnight. They discharged me. And I didn't feel right, but I figured, well, I'm not supposed to feel right after what I went through. So I went home. About 4 weeks later, I lost my balance and fell. For no reason, just fell. And I fell onto a coffee table, and the edge of the coffee table hit me right in the ribs. This was late at night. It hurt like hell. I didn't know if I'd broken some ribs or not. I got in my car. I drove to the emergency room. This is during the height of COVID, keep in mind. After I finally got through all the COVID checkpoints and got into the emergency room, I told the guy my story. I told him I fell. I told him about my brain injury. I told him about the brain bleed I had. He told me to go sit down over there. So I did. I sat there for 4 hours in excruciating pain. I finally got called into kind of a makeshift examining room because the emergency department was so full. Some obviously almost a doctor looked at the x-ray, said to me, "I don't see anything broken. Here's a pain pill. Go home." I said, you're not listening to me. Something caused me to fall. My balance has gone to hell. I had a brain injury. Don't you think you should do a CT scan of my head to see? They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They said, from everything we see, you're okay. We've taken, they took my blood pressure. Everything's fine. Here's a pill. That pill turned out to be an extra strength Tylenol. And they sent me home. I went home. I was so pissed. And over the course of the next week or two, things started to go downhill. I started to have symptoms like you would have from a stroke. I started to get aphasia. I had little episodes of 2, 3, 4 minutes where I could not form a sentence. I couldn't talk. I was getting dizzy. I had to hold on to things to maintain my balance. My memory was failing. My memory was going. I couldn't remember things. And then these little attacks would go away and I'd feel okay. And I figured, well, maybe I'm still just healing up from that fall and that head injury. So I'm in a store and I'm buying something. And I go to talk to the clerk behind the counter and I cannot talk. I can't talk. I can't form words. My brain is a jumble. After a few minutes, it resolved enough for me to go out to my car. Went out to my car outside. I called my son. On the conversation about what was going on with my son, I had another attack and couldn't talk anymore. He told me, stay where I am. He comes and gets me and takes me over to one of the local hospitals on which he's on the board of directors, so they know him over there. He got me right in. I got the VIP treatment. They took a CT scan of my head immediately, and the next thing I knew, I was on a helicopter flying to this big hospital with a neurology wing. Landed on the roof. They wheeled me down to intensive care. Next thing I know, I'm talking to a neurosurgeon who's telling me that if I don't get surgery and get this thing taken out, I have better than a 50% chance of dying from it. It was that immediate and that critical, according to them. The next day, I had the surgery. It was one of the most scary and unpleasant experiences of my life. I swear they tried to kill me in that hospital with the food they were serving me. Because my cholesterol was high, they put me on what they call a cardiac diet. I was allowed to have absolutely no salt or no fat. The only thing I was allowed to eat was sugar. The breakfast they brought me was Special K, skim milk, orange juice, dry toast, and a pastry. It was crazy. These people are out of their mind. They don't have a clue about nutrition in any way, shape, form, or manner. That pissed me off so bad. I finally got out of it. They did every test known to man on me. They did electroencephalograms. That's me, wired up to the machine to make sure everything was okay. They did MRIs on my head. They did CT scans. They did everything. And they said I'm okay. But I went home from the hospital and I continued to have those symptoms. I continued to have those symptoms for almost a week afterwards because nobody told me. They didn't think to tell me that it's going to take a while for my brain to expand back into that area where it had been compressed by that huge blood clot. The recovery from that, I was convinced after a few months that I was done. I was done. I was ready to just die. I was still losing my balance. I was still having some memory issues. I could talk, but I was convinced that I was permanently disabled from that head injury and from that surgery. I was depressed again. I was very unhappy. As far as I was concerned, this is how it all ends. You don't ever want to be in a place like that, yet so many of us end up there. Maybe the luckiest thing that might happen to us is we do get Alzheimer's and dementia, so we don't remember who and what we used to be. I gained weight during that, what ended up being a year of recovery. I gained 30 or 40 pounds. I didn't care. I didn't care. Why would I care? I didn't think I was going to live to see my next birthday. But I'm a fighter. I always have been. I fought all my life. So I started to fight back. I started getting back onto a keto diet and starting to take a really serious look at carnivore, starting to put together, when my brain started working like it was supposed to again, putting together all the pieces of this puzzle, and determined that even though I'd been trying to be healthy all my life, I now knew everything I was doing wrong, and that the carb addiction was the problem. I went on carnivore August the 1st, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. Haven't had a gram of carbohydrate since. 2 years later, I can truly say that every medical condition that I had, from the high blood pressure to the arthritis and the pain and the back pain and the knee pain and the eczema and the recurrence of cancer itself, because I'm a cancer survivor as far as I'm concerned. I had melanoma, and now I don't. I always thought it was coming back, but since being on carnivore, I've had no indications. And I truly believe today that cancer is a metabolic disorder. And when you get your metabolism fixed and become metabolically healthy, you may not become Superman, but you sure have a leg up on cancer. To this day, and the reason I'm making this video is to try to impress on you and everybody that watches me, whether you know me, my history or not, that I can truly say with the utmost of belief and confidence in that belief, that had I not made that decision to go carnivore, and had I not discovered how to cure the addictions that had always ruined my efforts, you would have never heard of Old Guy Carnivore. I started this YouTube adventure 1 full year after I became a carnivore, at which time I was fully convinced that the reason I was still here, the reason I had a brain that worked the way it did, the reason that I was healthy, that I felt good, the reason that I was happy and not suicidally depressed anymore, was attributed solely to properly nourishing my body. Many of you out there are following in my footsteps, maybe not with brain surgery, but with many other ailments that in the final analysis are caused by those few criminals in our history that are responsible for misleading the world for profit and religious reasons and ego and fame and power. These criminals are responsible for the shape that I was in 3 years ago and that most of the human beings on this planet are in today. And it needs to change. It needs to change. If you're considering carnivore, if you're trying carnivore, if you're struggling on carnivore, if you understand why, all I can tell you is look at me. I'm an example. I'm an example of a victim of all of that corruption and crime who managed to save his own life by doing only one thing: eating only animal products and nothing else. That's the best I can do, my friends. This message, this video is not going to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I'm a nobody. But if there's a couple of you who identify with a few of the things I've said and say, wow, I'm going through that now, and you take it seriously and save your own lives, then I did my job, and that makes me happy. That's enough of that for today. Take the rest of the day off and eat meat.